Introduction: The city that touched the sky. Imagine a city born of a prophecy, rising from the shimmering waters of a vast lake. This was Tenochtitlan at its zenith, the beating heart of the Aztec Empire. Picture colossal temples, their crimson facades reaching for the heavens, dedicated to gods both fearsome and benevolent. Envision bustling canals, alive with canoes laden with goods from across the empire, connecting vibrant marketplaces where merchants bartered obsidian blades, shimmering quetzal feathers, and golden adornments. Grand causeways, engineering marvels of their time, stretched across the lake, linking the island metropolis to the mainland. Aqueducts carried fresh water from distant springs, feeding intricate floating gardens, chinampas, that provided sustenance for a population numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Tenochtitlan was a marvel, a metropolis of unparalleled sophistication and power, a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of the Mexica people. But this isn't just a story of architectural grandeur or imperial might. It's a raw, compelling narrative that continues to resonate today. It's a profound exploration of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, a stark illustration of the devastating impact of imperialism, and a foundational tale that shaped the very identity of a nation. The fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 wasn't merely the end of an empire. It was a collision of worlds, cultures, and destinies that irrevocably altered the course of history. At the center of this cataclysmic encounter stand a handful of pivotal figures. There are the Aztecs themselves, a people of formidable warriors and intricate spiritual beliefs, led by their revered emperor, Moctezuma II, a man grappling with divine omens and an unimaginable threat. Opposing them is Hernán Cortés, the cunning and ruthless Spanish conquistador, driven by ambition and a hunger for gold. Caught in the violent crucible are figures like Cuauhtémoc, the valiant young emperor who would make a final, desperate stand, and the Tlaxcalans, fierce rivals of the Aztecs, who would become crucial allies in the Spanish conquest. Their interwoven fates, played out against the backdrop of Tenochtitlan's final days, form a saga of triumph, betrayal, and the enduring. Chapter 1: Rise of the Mexica. Long before the arrival of the Spaniards, the land that would become the heart of the Aztec Empire was a tumultuous patchwork of warring city-states, each vying for dominance in the fertile and resource-rich Valley of Mexico. Amidst this volatile landscape, a nomadic people known as the Mexica embarked on an arduous, decades-long journey. They were a people of humble origins, often scorned by the more established groups, forced to migrate from their ancestral homeland, Aztlan, in the mythical north. Their wanderings were not aimless. They were guided by a potent prophecy handed down through generations. They were to settle where they found an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus, devouring a serpent, on an island in the middle of a lake. After enduring countless hardships, battles, displacements, and the struggle for acceptance, the Mexica finally sighted this auspicious omen in 1325 CE. It appeared in the most unlikely of places, the marshy, mosquito-ridden waters of Lake Texcoco, an area considered undesirable by their powerful neighbors. Undeterred, and with a fervent belief in their divine destiny, they began the monumental task of building their humble settlement. Driving wooden pilings into the lake bed, dredging mud to create small islets, they slowly, painstakingly, laid the foundations for what would become the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan. From these seemingly inauspicious beginnings, a destiny of unparalleled power and influence began to unfurl, transforming a group of outcasts into the rulers of a vast dominion. The Mexica's meteoric rise was not merely a feat of engineering, it was intrinsically linked to their complex and demanding religious beliefs. Their worldview was one of constant struggle and delicate balance, where the gods, though benevolent, also demanded appeasement and nourishment to maintain the cosmic order. At the core of their vast pantheon was Huitzilopochtli, the fierce god of war and the sun, who was also the patron deity of the Mexica people. They believed that Huitzilopochtli required the vital essence, the sacred lifeblood of warriors, to fuel the sun's daily journey across the sky and prevent the world from plunging into eternal darkness. This profound religious imperative often manifested in the practice of human sacrifice, a ritual deeply misunderstood and condemned by the European invaders, but considered a sacred duty by the Aztecs. For them, these sacrifices were not acts of barbarism but necessary acts of reciprocity, a profound exchange with the divine, vital for the continuation of life, good harvests, and the very existence of their world. This spiritual conviction, combined with a fierce martial tradition, fueled their relentless imperial expansion. Through a shrewd combination of military conquest and strategic alliances, often solidified by dynastic marriages and the promise of mutual prosperity, the Mexica forged a vast tributary empire. They didn't necessarily impose direct administrative rule over conquered territories, but rather demanded tribute, a steady flow of goods, raw materials, labor, and crucially, sacrificial captives, which flowed back to Tenochtitlan, enriching the capital and solidifying its hegemonic power over much of Mesoamerica. The very fabric of Aztec society was meticulously structured, a rigid pyramid of power and responsibility that ensured stability and efficiency. At the apex was the Tlatoani, the emperor, considered a divine representative on earth, chosen for his wisdom, courage, and lineage. Beneath him stood the elite class of the nobility, or pipiltan, who held key positions in government, the military, and the vast bureaucratic apparatus. This class included accomplished generals, learned judges, and the high priests who presided over the elaborate rituals and maintained the sacred knowledge contained in their codices. The priests wielded immense influence, interpreting divine will, overseeing the meticulous calculations of their calendar, and guiding public life through prophecy and ritual. The backbone of the empire was its vast populace of commoners, or Masahualtan, who formed the majority of the population. These were the farmers who tilled the ingenious chinampas, the floating gardens that were the agricultural lifeblood of Tenochtitlan, and the skilled artisans, merchants, and laborers who sustained the empire. They paid taxes in the form of goods and labor, supporting the entire societal edifice. Yet the most revered class after the nobility, and indeed the primary avenue for social mobility, were the warriors. From childhood, boys were rigorously trained in the art of combat, aspiring to join prestigious and feared elite orders like the Jaguar or Eagle warriors. Their prowess in battle was not just for conquest. The capture of enemy combatants for sacrifice was a paramount goal, elevating their social standing and ensuring the empire's continued vitality and the favor of the gods. This intricate societal web, bound by faith, conquest, and rigid hierarchy, created the formidable and awe-inspiring civilization that the Spanish would soon encounter. Chapter 2. Tenochtitlan, Venice of the New World. Emerging from the vast expanse of Lake Texcoco, Tenochtitlan was less a city on water and more a city of water, a true marvel of ancient engineering that captivated all who beheld it. Its founders, the Mexica, had transformed a seemingly inhospitable swamp into a thriving metropolis, earning it the moniker, Venice of the New World. The most visible of their engineering feats were the sophisticated network of causeways that radiated outwards, linking the island city to the mainland. These massive earthen and stone thoroughfares, some wide enough for 10 horsemen abreast, not only facilitated movement but also served as vital defensive barriers. Equally impressive were the twin aqueducts that snaked their way from the springs of Chapultepec, delivering fresh, potable water directly into the city's heart, a feat of hydraulic engineering unrivaled in the Americas at the time. Within the city itself, a grid of canals served as primary arteries for transport, with countless canoes ferrying people and goods. Dominating the cityscape were the awe-inspiring temples, particularly the Templo Mayor, a towering twin pyramid dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the god of rain. These monumental structures, adorned with intricate carvings and vibrant paints, were not just places of worship, but also astronomical observatories and symbols of Aztec power, reaching towards the sky in a profound statement of their dominion. Within this meticulously planned urban environment, daily life in Tenochtitlan was a vibrant, ceaseless hum of activity. The city teemed with an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time, comparable to Paris or Constantinople. Early mornings saw the fog lift from the chinampas, the ingenious floating gardens that fed the city, worked by diligent farmers. Markets, known as tianguis, were the bustling social and economic hubs, most famously the Grand Market of Tlatelolco, a sister city merged with Tenochtitlan. Here, thousands gathered daily to trade everything from maize, beans, and chili peppers to exotic birds, precious metals, finely woven textiles, and obsidian tools. While currency was not typically used in the European sense, cacao beans, cotton cloaks, and quills filled with gold dust often served as mediums of exchange. Homes, typically made of adobe and reed, were arranged around courtyards, housing extended families. Education was highly valued, with distinct schools for boys and girls, preparing them for roles as warriors, priests, artisans, or homemakers. Public life was structured by religious festivals, elaborate ceremonies, and the rhythmic beat of drums announcing everything from the rising sun to the start of a sacrifice. The foundation of the Aztec Empire's vast wealth and power lay in its highly effective economy and tribute system. Unlike European empires, the Aztecs primarily ruled through tribute rather than direct administration. Conquered city-states were allowed to largely maintain their own internal governance, but were compelled to send regular shipments of goods to Tenochtitlan. This wealth included foodstuffs like corn, beans, and chia, luxury items such as jade, turquoise, and shimmering quetzal feathers for aristocratic regalia, raw materials like timber and cotton, and manufactured goods like pottery, cloaks, and weaponry. Specialized scribes, known as tlaquiloque, meticulously recorded every item of tribute in intricate codices, ensuring the vast network of supply chains functioned smoothly. This system created immense prosperity for the capital, allowing it to support its massive population, vast public works, and powerful elite. Bolstering this economic might was the empire's formidable military might. Every able-bodied male was expected to receive military training, creating a disciplined and highly effective fighting force. Aztec warriors, organized into various units and elite orders like the Jaguar and Eagle Knights, were renowned for their bravery, ferocity, and strategic prowess. Their primary objective in warfare was not necessarily to kill but to capture enemies alive for sacrifice, a practice that struck fear into the hearts of their adversaries. This combination of shrewd economic extraction and overwhelming military dominance ensured Tenochtitlan's position as the undisputed center of Mesoamerica, a jewel in the heart of an empire at its peak, utterly unaware of the storm. Chapter 3. The Spanish Land on the Shore. The year is 1519. From the eastern horizon, across the vast, uncharted expanse of the Atlantic, a small armada of 11 ships, mere specks on the boundless ocean, pushed westward, carrying a cargo far more dangerous than cannon and steel, the insatiable hunger of a new world power. At its head was Hernán Cortés, a charismatic and cunning Spanish hidalgo, a minor nobleman, with a sharp, calculating mind and an even sharper thirst for glory and gold. He had set sail from Cuba, ostensibly dispatched by Governor Diego Velázquez on what was framed as a mission of trade and reconnaissance to the rumored rich lands of the West. However, Cortés harbored far grander, unauthorized designs, a hunger for conquest that gnawed at his very soul and drove his every decision. On a pivotal day, April 22, 1519, this ambition found its first tangible foothold when the ships dropped anchor off a sandy stretch of coastline, a place the Spanish would soon name La Villa Rica de la Vera Cruz, the rich city of the True Cross, what we know today as Vera Cruz. The humid, oppressive air, the dense, unfamiliar jungle, and the distant, muffled sounds of an unknown civilization promised not just new discoveries, but the potential for an empire beyond their wildest European dreams. Cortés's arrival on the mainland was an act of audacious defiance against Governor Velázquez, a gamble born of desperation and boundless ambition. Velázquez, increasingly wary of Cortés's independent spirit, his growing popularity among the men, and whispers of his true intentions, had attempted to strip him of his command just before his departure from Cuba. But Cortés, sensing his moment slipping away, had bypassed these direct orders, setting sail in a frantic race against recall. Now on the mainland, thousands of miles from direct Spanish authority, he executed a masterstroke of political maneuvering that sealed his expedition's fate. To prevent any thought of retreat among his sometimes disgruntled and nervous men, and to solidify his absolute authority, he famously scuttled his own ships. This wasn't a burning of the vessels, as often romanticized, but a methodical dismantling and grounding of the fleet, rendering them completely unusable for return. This act was a brutal, unequivocal declaration of intent. There was no turning back. His men now faced a stark, terrifying choice: conquer the unknown land before them or perish in the attempt. This irreversible commitment not only quashed dissent, but also transformed a mere reconnaissance mission into an unauthorized, high-stakes gamble for ultimate power and wealth, utterly detached from the distant, weakening authority of the Cuban governor. Immediately upon planting their feet on the sandy shores, Cortés and his men initiated their early contact with the coastal tribes. The first significant indigenous group they encountered were the Totonacs, inhabitants of the bustling town of Zempoala, located just inland from their landing site. These initial interactions were fraught with a profound cultural chasm. the Europeans unable to comprehend the complex Mesoamerican worldview, and the indigenous peoples bewildered by the Spanish appearance, technology, and aggressive demeanor. Yet amidst this confusion, a crucial, nascent understanding began to emerge. The Totonacs, while outwardly deferential to the powerful newcomers, harbored deep-seated resentment against their formidable overlords, the Aztecs. For generations, they, along with many other polities in the region, had endured the crushing burden of Aztec tribute, a relentless demand for vast quantities of goods, forced labor, and, most terrifyingly, sacrificial victims for the insatiable gods of Tenochtitlan. Cortés, with his keen political acumen and his rapidly acquired understanding of the local power dynamics, aided significantly by his initial translators, including a shipwrecked Spaniard named Jerónimo de Aguilar, and soon, the invaluable Malintzin, La Malinche, quickly perceived this simmering discontent. He shrewdly presented himself, not as another marauding overlord, but as a potential liberator, a powerful ally against a common enemy. The Totonacs, desperate for relief from the oppressive Aztec tyranny, saw in these strange, bearded men with their glistening steel weapons, booming cannons, and waterhouses a glimmer of hope, a potential counterweight to the empire that held them captive. This early contact was far more than a mere exchange of curiosities and diplomatic pleasantries. It was the genesis of a crucial network of alliances, laying the groundwork for the Spanish to exploit the deep-seated divisions and long-standing enmities within the Aztec Empire. This strategic alliance would prove to be the single most important factor in the subsequent conquest, transforming a small band of European adventurers into the unexpected spearhead of a much larger, indigenous-led assault on the heart. Chapter 4. A Web of Alliances. As Cortés cast off the security of his ships, his future in this new world hinged not just on steel and gunpowder, but on words and understanding. It was here that Malintzin, soon to be known as La Malinche by the Spanish, emerged as an indispensable figure, arguably the most crucial individual in the unfolding drama of the conquest. Born into a noble Nahua family, Malintzin had been sold into slavery in her youth, leading her to acquire proficiency in both Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and Yucatec Maya. When Cortés acquired her, along with other enslaved women from the Chontal Maya, her linguistic gift proved invaluable. Initially, she translated from Nahuatl to Maya for Jerónimo de Aguilar, who then translated from Maya to Spanish for Cortés. Soon, however, Malintzin mastered Spanish herself, becoming Cortés's direct and utterly essential interpreter. But her role transcended mere translation. She possessed an intimate knowledge of Mesoamerican cultures, social structures, and political rivalries. She became Cortés's eyes and ears, his cultural bridge, advising him on local customs, warning him of potential ambushes, and guiding him through the labyrinthine politics of the region. Her insights allowed Cortés to anticipate Aztec strategies, understand their motivations, and, most critically, identify their enemies. Without Malintzin, Cortés's expedition would likely have faltered, unable to navigate the complex human landscape of Mesoamerica. Leveraging Malintzin's unparalleled linguistic and strategic acumen, Cortés rapidly began to form alliances with the enemies of the Aztecs. His initial, cautious interactions with the Totonacs of Zempoala proved to be a critical first step. The Totonacs, resentful of the harsh tribute demands and the constant fear of Aztec sacrificial raids, eagerly embraced the opportunity to side with these powerful newcomers. They offered not just warriors and supplies, but invaluable intelligence about the Aztec Empire's structure, its military strength, and the deep-seated animosities it had fostered among its subject peoples. This initial alliance emboldened Cortés, confirming his suspicion that the Aztec Empire was not a monolithic entity, but a fragile dominion held together by fear. The most significant and brutal alliance, however, was forged with the Tlaxcalans. The Tlaxcalans were a fiercely independent people, proud warriors who had successfully resisted Aztec domination for generations, enduring a perpetual state of warfare, the Flower Wars, that served as a grim training ground for both sides. When Cortés and his Totonac allies marched into Tlaxcalan territory, they were met not with friendship, but with a series of ferocious battles. For weeks, the small Spanish force, aided by their indigenous allies, fought desperate engagements against overwhelming Tlaxcalan numbers. Despite their superior weaponry, the Spanish suffered significant casualties, and Cortés himself was nearly killed. However, the Tlaxcalans, impressed by the Spanish tenacity, discipline, and unconventional fighting methods, and perhaps more importantly, seeing them as a means to finally break free from Aztec pressure, eventually sued for peace. This was brutal diplomacy in its rawest form. Cortés, seizing the moment, offered not just an end to hostilities but a grand alliance against their common oppressor. For the Tlaxcalans, this was a chance for ultimate vengeance, a historical opportunity to dismantle the empire that had long tormented them. These alliances were not formed without profound cultural misunderstandings. The Spanish, driven by Christian evangelism and a thirst for gold, viewed the indigenous world through a lens of perceived savagery and paganism. They were horrified by human sacrifice and idolatry, which they saw as justifications for conquest and conversion. The indigenous peoples, in turn, struggled to comprehend the Spanish obsession with gold, their rigid monotheism, and their brutal military tactics. While allies like the Tlaxcalans saw the Spanish as powerful, temporary tools in their own regional conflicts, Cortés saw them as mere auxiliaries, instruments to serve the Spanish crown and God. This fundamental divergence in understanding, where one side sought an equal partnership against a common foe, and the other viewed their allies as subordinates in a divinely sanctioned conquest, would have profound and tragic consequences, setting the stage for the dramatic march into the heart of the Chapter 5. Entering the Empire. With their alliances solidified and their ranks swelled by thousands of eager Tlaxcalan warriors, Cortés and his motley army prepared for the most audacious gamble of their lives, the march inland to Tenochtitlan. Leaving the coastal humidity behind, they began their ascent into the cooler, higher altitudes of the Central Plateau. This wasn't merely a walk, it was a psychological operation. The Spanish deliberately took a circuitous route, passing through various settlements that were under Aztec dominion or fiercely independent. Each step was a demonstration of their power and a test of Aztec resolve. The sight of these strange, bearded men on horseback, accompanied by their traditional enemies, the Tlaxcalans, sent ripples of disbelief and fear through the region. Along the way, they faced skirmishes, observed the lush, productive lands of the empire, and witnessed the awe-inspiring volcanic peaks that guarded the Valley of Mexico, including the snow-capped Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. The sheer scale of the landscape and the evident wealth of the empire must have both thrilled and intimidated the conquistadors. As they pressed deeper into Aztec territory, they began to have their first encounters with Aztec officials. These initial meetings were meticulously choreographed, formal affairs designed to impress and intimidate. Envoys dispatched by the emperor himself met the Spanish, bringing lavish gifts of gold, intricate featherwork, and fine textiles. These gifts, intended to convey the Aztecs' power and generosity, had the opposite effect on the gold-hungry Spaniards, only fueling their avarice and confirming the empire's vast wealth. The officials, often high-ranking nobles, attempted to dissuade Cortés from continuing his march, describing the dangers of the journey, the harshness of the mountain passes, and the formidable power of their emperor. They conveyed Moctezuma's wishes for the Spanish to turn back, emphasizing the difficulty and futility of reaching Tenochtitlan. However, these warnings only strengthened Cortés's resolve. He interpreted them as signs of weakness or fear, and the gifts as bribes. The Spanish, in turn, demonstrated their military might, firing cannons and showcasing their horses, powerful animals completely unknown in Mesoamerica, to inspire a mix of awe and terror. Back in Tenochtitlan, the news of these strange invaders and their steady advance threw Emperor Moctezuma II into a profound state of indecision. Unlike the decisive and often ruthless leaders of the Mexica's past, Moctezuma was a man caught between the rigid traditions of his empire and a bewildering, unprecedented threat. His initial responses swung wildly between diplomatic overtures and vague threats. He sent gifts, hoping to satisfy the Spaniards and encourage them to leave, but also dispatched priests and sorcerers to try and magically impede their progress. His indecision stemmed from a complex interplay of factors: diplomacy, as he sought to understand and potentially control these newcomers through negotiation; superstition, deeply embedded in Aztec worldview; and a series of unsettling divine omens. For years prior to Cortés's arrival, portents of doom had reportedly plagued Tenochtitlan: a fiery comet, a temple struck by lightning, strange phenomena on Lake Texcoco, and a weeping woman foretelling disaster. These omens, interpreted by Moctezuma and his priests, suggested a cosmic upheaval, possibly even the return of the exiled feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, whose legend spoke of a bearded, pale-skinned deity arriving from the east. This confluence of prophecy and reality paralyzed Moctezuma, preventing him from unleashing the full military might of his empire against the invaders while they were still vulnerable. Instead, he chose a path of cautious observation and appeasement, inadvertently guiding the Spanish deeper into the very heart of his dominion, towards a fate he could scarcely comprehend. Chapter 6. The Seizure of the Emperor. On November 8, 1519, a date that would forever be etched in the annals of history, Cortés and his men arrived in Tenochtitlan peacefully. Emerging from the causeway that bisected Lake Texcoco, the Spanish conquistadors and their thousands of Tlaxcalan allies were met with a sight that must have left them awestruck. The city, a shimmering emerald on the water, with its towering temples and bustling canals, was beyond anything they had ever conceived. Emperor Moctezuma, carried on a magnificent palanquin adorned with quetzal feathers and gold, emerged to greet them. The meeting was a spectacle of two worlds colliding. Moctezuma, regal and adorned with the symbols of his divine authority, exchanged polite, if strained, pleasantries with Cortés, a man whose ambition was thinly veiled beneath European ceremonial garb. Gifts were exchanged. Moctezuma presented Cortés with a necklace of golden crabs, while Cortés placed a glass necklace around the emperor's neck. The Spanish were then escorted to the palace of Axayacatl, Moctezuma's father, a sprawling complex that would become their quarters. For several days, an uneasy truce prevailed, marked by tours of the city, exchanges of gifts, and formal diplomatic courtesies. The Spanish marveled at the city's splendor, but their eyes constantly sought out the glimmer of gold. This fragile peace, however, was a mere prelude to Cortés's audacious plan. Just days after their arrival, in an act of staggering audacity and cold calculation, Moctezuma was taken hostage in his own palace. Cortés, citing flimsy pretexts like an alleged Aztec attack on a Spanish garrison on the coast, which he himself had provocatively left behind, confronted Moctezuma. Surrounded by armed Spanish soldiers, with Malincin translating the tense exchange, Cortés effectively placed the emperor under house arrest within the very palace where the Spanish were quartered. He claimed this was for Moctezuma's own safety and to ensure the Aztec people's cooperation. Despite his immense power, Moctezuma, perhaps still bound by his omens or unwilling to provoke open warfare within his sacred capital, submitted. He continued to rule in name, holding court, issuing decrees, and even performing some religious ceremonies, but all under the watchful, ever-present eyes of his Spanish captors. The psychological blow to the Aztec leadership and people was immense. Their divine emperor, a descendant of gods, was now a prisoner. As the days turned into weeks, the tensions mounted as Spanish greed became clear. What began as an uneasy cohabitation quickly devolved into exploitation. The Spanish relentlessly demanded more gold, ordering Moctezuma to command his nobles to empty their treasuries. Vast quantities of precious metals, accumulated over centuries, were melted down into ingots, a process that horrified the Aztecs who saw their sacred artifacts reduced to mere commodities. Cortés also demanded the dismantling of Aztec idols and the erection of Christian crosses and images of the Virgin Mary within the Great Temple, a sacrilege that deeply offended the priesthood and the populace. The presence of the Spanish, their strange customs, their growing demands, and the blatant disrespect shown to their gods and emperor created a volatile atmosphere. While Moctezuma's immediate circle remained outwardly loyal, whispers of outrage spread through the city. The people, who had initially been curious or fearful, now began to feel a simmering resentment. Cortés's hostage-taking was designed to control the empire from its very head, but in doing so, he was slowly, inexorably, tightening a noose of indignation around his own neck, pushing the proud Aztec people to their breaking. Chapter 7. Massacre at the Great Temple. The fragile, volatile peace that had settled over Tenochtitlan shattered with the arrival of a new, unexpected threat from the coast. News reached Cortés that a large Spanish force, led by Panfilo de Narvaez, had landed in Veracruz with orders from Governor Velázquez to arrest him for insubordination. Facing immediate peril, Cortés made the fateful decision to leave Tenochtitlan and confront Narvaez, taking the bulk of his veteran soldiers with him. He left behind a garrison of roughly 120 men and a larger number of Tlaxcalan allies, under the command of Pedro de Alvarado. Alvarado, known for his rashness and cruelty, was a stark contrast to Cortés's calculating temperament. He was given strict orders to maintain the fragile peace and guard Moctezuma, yet his paranoia and lack of understanding of Aztec rituals would soon ignite a powder keg. While Cortés was away, successfully defeating Narvaez and even convincing many of his soldiers to join his own ranks. Tenochtitlan prepared for one of its most sacred and important religious festivals, Toxcatl, dedicated to the god Huitzilopochtli. The central plaza in front of the great temple teemed with thousands of unarmed Aztec nobles, priests, and warriors, adorned in their finest regalia, engaged in ceremonial dances and songs. Despite assurances of peace, Alvarado, consumed by fear of a perceived uprising and likely enticed by the gold and jewels worn by the participants, made a catastrophic decision. In a sudden, unprovoked act of brutality, Pedro de Alvarado ordered a massacre. His soldiers, armed with swords and lances, descended upon the defenseless celebrants, butchering them indiscriminately. The plaza, moments before filled with vibrant life, became a horrific tableau of blood and death. The codices depict scenes of unspeakable horror, with Spanish soldiers hacking at men, women, and children, their lust for gold seemingly driving the frenzy. The immediate aftermath of this atrocity was an explosion of Aztec outrage. The massacre was not merely an attack on people, it was a profound sacrilege, a direct assault on their gods, their traditions, and their very identity. The city, which had endured the humiliation of its emperor's captivity, now erupted in a furious, unified rebellion. The Spanish garrison, trapped in the palace of Axayacatl, found itself under a relentless siege. Thousands of enraged Aztec warriors, now stripped of any illusion of peaceful coexistence, swarmed the palace, raining down arrows, stones, and javelins. The Massihualtan, the commoners, who had initially been more passive, now joined the Pipiltan in a desperate fight to expel the invaders. Food and water supplies to the palace were cut off, and the Spaniards faced constant attacks, forcing them into brutal, desperate street fighting. It was during this desperate siege that Moctezuma's death occurred, a moment shrouded in controversy and conflicting accounts that fuels the question, murder or mob? According to Spanish accounts, Cortés, having returned to a besieged Tenochtitlan with his new, larger force, coerced Moctezuma to appear on the palace rooftop. The emperor, still revered by some but now seen as a puppet by many, attempted to calm his furious people, urging them to cease their attacks against the Spanish. However, the crowd, disillusioned and enraged by the massacre, reportedly responded with a hail of stones and arrows, one of which struck Moctezuma, leading to his death a few days later. The Spanish claimed he died of his wounds, refusing food and medical attention. Aztec accounts, however, paint a different picture, asserting that the Spanish, recognizing Moctezuma, was no longer useful to them and had lost all authority, either strangled or stabbed him to death. Given the circumstances, the desperate situation of the Spanish, their ruthlessness, and their need to escape, the latter account holds significant historical weight. Regardless of the precise method, Moctezuma's death extinguished any remaining hope for a negotiated settlement, and plunged Chapter 8. La Noche Triste. The death of Moctezuma plunged the Spanish and their dwindling allies into an even more precarious position. With their imperial puppet gone and the city in full-blown rebellion, their survival inside the palace of Axayacatl became untenable. Surrounded by an enraged populace, with supplies dwindling and the stench of death heavy in the air, Cortés knew a decisive, desperate action was required. He ordered an immediate, covert retreat. On the night of June 30th, 1520, or July 1st, depending on the account, under the cloak of a torrential downpour and the deepest darkness, the Spanish attempted to flee the city under cover of night. They constructed a portable wooden bridge to span the gaps in the causeways where the Aztecs had removed sections. Laden with as much looted gold and treasure as they could carry, a fatal mistake for many, the long column of Spaniards and Tlaxcalan allies began their stealthy egress, hoping to slip unnoticed across the Tlacopan causeway towards the mainland. Their escape, however, was quickly discovered. The cries of an Aztec woman giving an alarm shattered the illusion of secrecy. Soon, the still, dark waters of Lake Texcoco erupted with war canoes. From all sides, Aztec warriors, incandescent with fury, swarmed the causeway. The Spanish ranks dissolved into chaos. The portable bridge became jammed in the muck, rendering it useless for crossing subsequent gaps. Loaded down by their heavy armor and the very gold they coveted, hundreds were killed during the escape. Spanish soldiers and Tlaxcalan allies drowned in the lake, dragged down by the weight of their treasures or impaled by obsidian blades. The Aztecs attacked relentlessly, raining down arrows, stones, and javelins from their canoes in the banks of the causeway. The narrow path became a bottleneck of death, choked with the bodies of men and horses. Cannons and other heavy equipment were lost to the depths. The night was a cacophony of desperate shouts, the clang of steel, the thud of projectiles, and the chilling war cries of the Aztecs exacting their vengeance. It was a rout, a slaughter, and the most devastating defeat the Spanish conquistadors would suffer in the Americas. Those who survived the horrific crossing, bleeding and exhausted, stumbled onto the mainland. As dawn broke, revealing the extent of his losses, hundreds of his best men, thousands of his indigenous allies, and nearly all of his precious cannons and gunpowder, Cortés mourned his losses under a tree. According to legend, he sat beneath a venerable ahuehuete tree in what is now Mexico City, tears streaming down his face as he contemplated the shattered remnants of his ambition. This moment of profound despair, known to history as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, marked the nadir of the Spanish conquest. It was a victory for the Aztecs, a moment where they had seemingly repelled the invaders and reclaimed their sacred city. Yet for Cortés, defeat was merely a prelude to a new, even more brutal resolve. The tears shed under the Árbol de la Noche Triste were not just for his fallen men, but for a temporary setback in a conquest he was determined to finish. The Aztecs had won the battle, but the war, as Cortés... Chapter 9. The siege begins. The humiliation of La Noche Triste might have broken a lesser man, but Hernán Cortés possessed an unyielding tenacity that bordered on madness. While his surviving men were demoralized and wounded, and his Tlaxcalan allies reeling from their own heavy losses, Cortés refused to concede defeat. Against all odds, he began the monumental task of regrouping and rebuilding his army. He rallied his remaining Spanish forces, instilling in them a renewed sense of purpose and vengeance. More critically, he returned to Tlaxcala, where, despite the recent catastrophe, the alliance held firm. The Tlaxcalans, seeing the Spanish as their only true hope for lasting vengeance against their ancient enemy, once again pledged their unwavering support. They provided food, shelter, and, most crucially, tens of thousands of warriors, a massive indigenous army that dwarfed Cortés's Spanish contingent. This period was also marked by a grim irony. A devastating smallpox epidemic, unknowingly introduced by a Spanish slave, began to sweep through Tenochtitlan, decimating the Aztec population and weakening their defenses even before the siege officially began. With his revitalized and significantly expanded army, Cortés returned to the Valley of Mexico in May 1521, ready to implement his grand, brutal strategy. The first phase of the siege was to systematically isolate Tenochtitlan from the mainland. The Spanish and their allies began to cut off the causeways and aqueducts. The main causeways connecting the city to Tlacopan, Tacuba, Tepeyac, and Iztapalapa became battlegrounds. Spanish forces, aided by their Tlaxcalan and other indigenous allies, fought inch by agonizing inch to control these vital arteries. Simultaneously, the aqueducts that supplied fresh water to the teeming metropolis, primarily the one from Chapultepec, were deliberately severed. This act of strategic cruelty immediately began to cripple the city, depriving its hundreds of thousands of inhabitants of their most essential resource and turning their abundant fresh water into a brackish, polluted nightmare. Starvation and thirst, coupled with the ravages of smallpox, began their slow, agonizing work within the city walls. However, Cortés understood that a land-based assault alone would be insufficient against an island city. His most innovative and decisive stroke of engineering was the construction of a fleet for naval warfare on Lake Texcoco using brigantines. These were small, maneuverable sailing ships, unlike anything seen in Mesoamerica. The components for 13 brigantines were prefabricated on the mainland, designed to be disassembled and then carried overland by thousands of indigenous porters from Tlaxcala, across mountains and plains, to the shores of Lake Texcoco. Once there, they were meticulously reassembled in a specially dug canal. When finally launched, these brigantines, armed with cannons and carrying Spanish crossbowmen and arquebusiers, gave Cortés absolute control of the lake. They could outmaneuver Aztec canoes, provide devastating covering fire, block supply routes, and launch amphibious assaults directly into the city's undefended flanks. The sheer scale and ingenuity of this undertaking were astonishing, reflecting Cortés's unwavering determination. The deployment of this formidable navy signaled the true beginning of the siege, transforming Tenochtitlan's watery defense into its most vulnerable point. Chapter 10. Cuauhtémoc, the Eagle Descends. As the Spanish noose tightened around Tenochtitlan, a new and formidable leader rose to confront the invaders. Following the deaths of Moctezuma and his successor, Cuitlahuac, who succumbed to smallpox after just 80 days on the throne, the Aztec Council of Nobles elected a young man of just 25 years, Cuauhtémoc. His name, meaning descending eagle or eagle that descends, was a potent symbol, evoking the ferocity and nobility of the Aztec warrior tradition. Unlike his uncle Moctezuma, Cuauhtémoc possessed no illusions about the Spanish or their intentions. He was a seasoned warrior, known for his courage and his unyielding resolve. He understood that the very existence of his people and their sacred city was at stake. His ascension marked a dramatic shift in leadership, from Moctezuma's indecision to a defiant, unyielding resistance. From the moment he assumed the mantle of Tlatoani, Cuauhtémoc demonstrated extraordinary leadership, bravery, and a steadfast refusal to surrender. He immediately rallied his people, reorganizing the defenses of the city and inspiring a desperate, unified resistance. He ordered the construction of barricades, the digging of trenches, and the strategic removal of causeway sections to impede Spanish advances. Knowing the Spanish relied on their brigantines, he ordered the creation of underwater traps to snag the ships. He personally led counterattacks, fighting alongside his warriors, his presence on the battlefield a powerful symbol of defiance. He enacted harsh penalties for disobedience or cowardice, ensuring that every citizen contributed to the war effort. His determination was absolute. Tenochtitlan would fight to the last breath. The ferocity of the Aztec defense under Cuauhtémoc astonished the Spanish, who had expected a quicker collapse after seizing control of the lake. Every house, every alleyway became a fortress, every canal a treacherous trap. Despite Cuauhtémoc's valiant leadership, the city was slowly but inexorably being strangled. The effects of starvation, disease, smallpox, and demoralization became the Aztecs' most insidious enemies. The cutting of the aqueducts meant no fresh water, forcing the inhabitants to drink brackish, polluted lake water, exacerbating existing health crises. Food supplies dwindled, leading to widespread hunger and emaciation. Even more devastating was the unseen killer, smallpox. The epidemic, which had swept through the city months before the siege, had already decimated the population, killing leaders like Cuitlahuac and countless warriors, priests, and commoners, including children. Those who survived were often too weak to fight or contribute to the defense. The constant barrage of Spanish cannon fire, combined with the relentless pressure from the brigantines and the relentless ground assaults, wore down the defenders both physically and psychologically. Despite Cuauhtémoc's inspiring defiance, the cumulative effects of thirst, hunger, illness, and the sheer numerical superiority of the Spanish and their indigenous allies began to chip away at the once indomitable spirit of Tenochtitlan. The eagle was descending, but it was fighting with. Chapter 11. The Fall of Tenochtitlan. The siege of Tenochtitlan dragged on for 93 days, a brutal, relentless grind of street-to-street combat, starvation, and disease. The once magnificent city, once a symbol of Aztec grandeur, was systematically reduced to rubble. Spanish brigantines patrolled the canals, their cannons tearing through adobe and stone. On land, the combined forces of the Spanish and their Tlaxcalan and other indigenous allies, numbering in the tens of thousands, pushed relentlessly inward, leveling buildings to create open ground for their cavalry and artillery. The defenders, weakened by hunger and ravaged by smallpox, fought with a desperate, almost suicidal bravery, every house becoming a fortress, every street a battleground. Cuauhtémoc, despite the overwhelming odds, continued to inspire his people, refusing to yield, even as his warriors dwindled and their strength waned. The final, agonizing act of the siege culminated on August 13, 1521. With the city reduced to a few final battered districts, the Spanish launched their decisive assault. The remaining Aztec defenders huddled among the ruins, were cut down or driven into the waters of the lake. Cuauhtémoc, recognizing that further resistance was futile and only meant more death for his people, attempted a daring escape by canoe across the lake. His aim was likely to rally support from unconquered territories or to continue the fight from elsewhere. However, his canoe was spotted and intercepted by a Spanish brigantine commanded by Captain Garcia Holguin. Cuauhtémoc was captured, brought before Cortés, and is said to have placed his hand on Cortés's dagger, asking the conquistador to kill him immediately. Cortés, however, had other plans for the young emperor, recognizing his symbolic importance. By the time Cuauhtémoc was captured, the city lay in ruins. What had once been a gleaming metropolis of temples, palaces, and bustling markets was now a landscape of pulverized stone, charred timbers, and the unburied dead. The magnificent Templo Mayor was a shattered husk, its idols toppled and defiled. The intricate canal system was choked with debris and corpses. The air hung heavy with the stench of death and decay, a grim testament to the ferocity of the fighting and the devastating impact of disease. An estimated 100,000 to 240,000 Aztecs perished during the siege, a staggering loss of life. The psychological impact on the survivors was immeasurable. Their world, their gods, their very way of life had been utterly demolished. With the capture of its last emperor and the utter destruction of its capital, the final, undeniable blow was struck. It was the end of the Aztec Empire. A civilization that had risen from humble beginnings to dominate Mesoamerica for nearly 2 centuries had fallen. The banner of the Spanish conquistadors, emblazoned with the cross, was raised over the desolate ruins. The sounds of war drums were replaced by the shouts of victorious Spanish soldiers and the wailing of the defeated. A new era, one of profound change and brutal subjugation, was ushered in, marked by the transformation of Tenochtitlan from the heart of an indigenous empire into the foundation of a new colonial power, Mexico City, the capital of New Spain. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not just a military victory, it was the symbolic collapse of a vast indigenous civilization, marking a pivotal Chapter 12, Aftermath of Conquest. With Tenochtitlan reduced to a smoldering ruin and its last emperor captive, Hernán Cortés, the architect of this astonishing triumph, wasted no time in consolidating his power. He formally claimed victory and became governor of New Spain, asserting the dominion of the Spanish crown over the vast territories of the former Aztec Empire. The immediate aftermath was a period of intense activity and brutal reorganization. Cortés, now the undisputed master of a shattered world, sent letters to Emperor Charles V, embellishing his exploits and minimizing his insubordination, all while laying the groundwork for a new colonial enterprise. The fallen Aztec capital was immediately designated as the site for the new Spanish administrative center, destined to become Mexico City. Orders were given for the methodical demolition of the remaining Aztec structures, their stones repurposed as foundations for churches and government buildings, symbolically replacing the old order with the new. The days and weeks following the fall were characterized by widespread looting and the systematic destruction of temples. Spanish soldiers, driven by avarice and a zealous religious fervor, swarmed through the ruins, desperate to uncover the vast quantities of gold, silver, and precious stones they believed were still hidden. What they found was often melted down, regardless of its artistic or historical value, into easily transportable ingots. The great temples, the heart of Aztec spiritual life, were deliberately targeted for demolition. Idols were smashed, altars desecrated, and sacred texts. The codices that contained centuries of Aztec history, knowledge, and religious beliefs were either burned as pagan abominations or simply destroyed in the chaos. This destruction was not merely incidental. It was a conscious effort to erase the indigenous spiritual and cultural landscape, paving the way for the imposition of Christianity and Spanish societal norms. The cultural vandalism was immense, representing an irreparable loss of knowledge and heritage. Beyond the physical destruction, the conquest unleashed a wave of profound indigenous trauma and population collapse. The immediate trauma of the siege, the starvation, the violence, the utter destruction of their sacred city, left an indelible mark on the survivors. They were now a conquered people, their leaders imprisoned or executed, their gods seemingly vanquished. The Spanish imposed the encomienda system, a thinly veiled form of forced labor, where indigenous populations were entrusted to Spanish overlords, who were theoretically meant to Christianize them, but effectively exploited their labor for mining and agriculture. This system, coupled with the brutal imposition of new social and economic structures, led to widespread displacement, poverty, and a complete disruption of traditional ways of life. However, the most catastrophic factor in the indigenous population collapse was not direct violence but disease, particularly smallpox. The epidemic that ravaged Tenochtitlan during the siege was just the first wave. With no natural immunity to Eurasian diseases like measles, influenza, and typhus, subsequent epidemics swept through the Americas with horrifying lethality. Within decades, the indigenous population of central Mexico plummeted by an estimated 80 to 90%, turning densely populated regions into desolate landscapes. This demographic catastrophe, a silent killer far more effective than any Spanish weapon, fundamentally altered the future of the continent, creating a vacuum that facilitated the consolidation of Spanish colonial power and cemented. Chapter 13: Legacy and Resistance. The thunder of conquest may have silenced the Aztec Empire, but it could not extinguish the vibrant flame of its culture. Despite the deliberate destruction and systematic oppression, Aztec culture survived in countless ways, in language, customs, and memory. The Spanish built their capital atop Tenochtitlan, but they could not build over the deep roots of a civilization. Indigenous spiritual practices, though driven underground or syncretized with Catholic rituals, persisted. Ancient deities found new forms in Christian saints, and pre-Hispanic agricultural techniques continued to feed the new colonial society. Many traditional foods, like maize, beans, squash, and chili, remained staples, carrying with them centuries of culinary heritage. The intricate patterns of pre-Columbian textiles and pottery continued to be woven and crafted, albeit often with new motifs. Even the hierarchical social structures, though disrupted, left imprints on the emerging colonial society. The memory of the empire, its glories and its tragic fall, was passed down through generations, often in secret, becoming a powerful undercurrent of resistance. One of the most enduring testaments to this cultural survival is the continued presence of Nahuatl today. While Spanish became the dominant language of New Spain, Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica, did not disappear. It continued to be spoken by millions, particularly in rural communities throughout central Mexico. Indeed, Nahuatl words became deeply embedded in the Spanish spoken in Mexico, enriching its vocabulary with terms for plants, animals, foods, and places. Words like chocolate, chocolatl, tomato, tomatl, avocado, ahuatl, chili, and even coyote, coyotl, are just a few examples of Nahuatl's lasting linguistic legacy that have spread globally. Today, Nahuatl remains one of the most widely spoken indigenous languages in Mexico, a living bridge to the pre-Hispanic past. Its continued vitality is a powerful symbol of resilience, proving that even after centuries of conquest, a language, and the worldview it embodies, can endure. The Fall of Tenochtitlan, therefore, is not merely a historical event. It is the crucible in which Mexican identity was forged. Modern Mexican identity is a complex, often contradictory blend of indigenous and European heritage, a concept sometimes called mestizaje. The conquest created a new people, the mestizos, who carry the blood and traditions of both worlds. For many Mexicans, the indigenous past, symbolized by the grandeur of the Aztecs and the tragedy of their fall, is a source of immense pride and a foundational element of their nationhood. Figures like Moctezuma and Cuauhtémoc are not just historical characters but national heroes, embodying resistance and dignity. The narrative of the conquest is deeply ingrained in the national consciousness, debated in art, literature, and public discourse. It shapes how Mexicans view their history, their relationship with Europe, and their place in the world. The fall of Tenochtitlan, rather than being an ending, became the dramatic, violent birth of a new cultural synthesis, a constantly evolving identity rooted in both the glory of the eagle and the sorrow. Chapter 14: Rediscovery and Reflection. For centuries after the conquest, the physical remnants of Tenochtitlan lay buried beneath the burgeoning colonial city, its grandeur largely forgotten or actively suppressed. Yet, the 20th century, particularly the latter half, witnessed a profound rediscovery of the Aztec world, largely driven by groundbreaking archaeological findings. The most spectacular revelation came in 1978, when electrical workers accidentally unearthed a massive carved stone disk depicting the Aztec goddess Coyochaqui. This discovery directly led to the excavation of the Templo Mayor, the very heart of Aztec spiritual and political life, located directly beneath Mexico City's Metropolitan Cathedral. Subsequent digs revealed layers of offerings, smaller temples, and vast quantities of buried artifacts: obsidian knives, jade masks, ceramic vessels, and sacrificial altars, providing unprecedented insights into Aztec rituals, cosmology, and daily life. Beyond these monumental structures, the careful study of surviving codices, pictorial manuscripts like the Codex Mendoza or the Florentine Codex, compiled by indigenous scribes and Spanish chroniclers, offered invaluable narratives from the Aztec perspective, detailing their history, beliefs, and the traumatic events of the conquest. These material discoveries and textual interpretations have revolutionized our understanding of a civilization once dismissed as merely barbaric. The narrative of the fall of Tenochtitlan is not monolithic. Rather, it is a tapestry woven from diverse and often conflicting perspectives. How the story has been told has evolved dramatically over time, reflecting the prevailing ideologies and biases of different eras. Initially, the Spanish voices, primarily Cortés's own letters and the chronicles of his soldiers like Bernal Díaz del Castillo, dominated the narrative. These accounts celebrated the conquest as a heroic, divinely sanctioned triumph of Christianity over paganism, emphasizing Spanish bravery and technological superiority. For centuries, this largely triumphalist European perspective held sway. However, the deciphering and reinterpretation of Aztec voices, found in codices, oral traditions recorded by indigenous chroniclers, and later the works of Nahua scholars, began to challenge this singular view. These indigenous accounts portray the conquest as a devastating catastrophe, a story of betrayal, immense suffering, and the tragic end of a world. In modern times, academic and popular discourse has increasingly incorporated these indigenous perspectives, leading to a more nuanced and complex understanding. Contemporary historians and archaeologists, drawing on both sets of sources, have worked to deconstruct myths and present a more balanced, multifaceted narrative, acknowledging the critical roles of both Spanish and indigenous actors. This ongoing re-examination inevitably leads to a confrontation with the moral ambiguity of conquest. The Fall of Tenochtitlan forces us to grapple with difficult questions about colonization, cultural clash, and human nature. Was Cortés a villain or a product of his time? Were the Tlaxcalans collaborators or strategic survivors seeking their own liberation? Was the Aztec Empire a brutal oppressor, or a complex civilization with its own forms of order and justice? There are no easy answers. The story is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of imperial expansion, the profound impact of disease, and the clash between radically different worldviews. It highlights the inherent violence and exploitation in the imposition of one culture's dominance over another, yet also the remarkable resilience of the conquered. The Fall of Tenochtitlan stands as a powerful and enduring lesson in the complexities of history, urging us to reflect on power, identity, and the enduring human cost of ambition and belief. Conclusion. Tenochtitlan never died. The echoes of the final battle for Tenochtitlan on August 13, 1521, reverberate through history, marking not just the fall of a great city, but the violent pivot point for an entire continent. The story of its demise, from its majestic rise to its tragic destruction, offers us profound lessons. It is a testament to cultural resilience, demonstrating how language, traditions, and an indomitable spirit can endure centuries of suppression and transform into new expressions of identity. It starkly illustrates the fragility of even the most powerful empires, revealing how internal divisions and unforeseen external forces can combine to bring down seemingly invincible structures. Most importantly, it lays bare the immense human cost of conquest, the unfathomable loss of life to violence and disease, the psychological trauma, and the systematic dismantling of a vibrant civilization. Yet, Tenochtitlan's narrative does not end with its destruction. The stones of its temples became the foundations of a new city, but the spirit of the Mexica persisted. Today, millions of people in Mexico and beyond are the direct descendants of the Aztec people, carrying forward a rich heritage that intertwines with the very fabric of modern Mexico. Their languages, customs, and worldview continue to shape the cultural landscape, a living testament to an enduring past that refuses to be silenced. In the contemporary consciousness, Tenochtitlan stands as a potent symbol of both glory and tragedy. It represents the pinnacle of indigenous ingenuity, artistry, and political sophistication, a Mesoamerican Venice that truly touched the sky. But it is also a somber reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, cultural clash, and the brutal realities of imperial expansion. It is a place of profound historical memory, a wound that still informs national identity, a source of both pride in ancestral achievement and sorrow for what was lost. Tenochtitlan, though physically transformed, never truly died. It lives on in the memory of a people, in the language spoken in remote villages, and in the very foundations of Mexico City, forever echoing the triumphs and tears of its incredible story.